Am I, can you hear me? Oh, good. Okay. So let's do a roll call of who's here.
Recording in progress.
Thank you.
Chair Hirsch?
Yes. Veronica, let's have a roll call.
Yeah. Chair Hirsch,
Here. Oh, that was me.
Vice Chair Bolte,
He
absent.
will be in a few minutes, so we'll.
Board Member Chen? Present. Board Member Rosenberg? Present. Board Member Thompson? Present. We have a quorum.
So let's have agenda changes, additions, deletions. I can't. Who's,
We have a call to order first. Did you already say the AB 131? Yeah, we need the AB
On this side?
361.
David?
We need to do a call to order and do the AB 361.
oh, we do? Okay. We do?
Oh, we
I
don't.
thought we don't.
No. Oh, okay. You're right. You're right.
We don't have to
This
do it anymore.
this month, we don't have to.
Thank heavens, you know, okay, or something. So go ahead.
So call to order and then public comment for items not on the agenda. I think.
Oh, yes. Okay, thanks. Are there any?
No, I haven't received any speaker cards or raised hands.
Make sure.
Agenda?
No, there's no changes.
But we do not have the ad hoc meeting this after today.
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you. Thank you. Yes, there will be no ad hoc meeting today for the Silicon Valley Bank project.
I won't ask you why. City official reports?
Yes, so hold on one second. So just in planned absences, Board Member Chen will be absent at the next, has a planned absence at the next hearing.
Oh, no.
And some upcoming items for the next hearing. We're anticipating to bring back the 3200 Park Boulevard. That's the Fry's site development agreement. Planning to come back with the project as a whole. We won't be asking for a recommendation at that time, just another hearing on the project. We're anticipating chair and vice chair elections and a first kind of study session of the annual report and council work plan or plan for that day. New projects that came in. The 420 Acacia project has come in with a formal application. So we'll be looking to try and schedule an early first hearing when we can for that project. And I think that's it.
I'd like to, now that was one, that particular project, okay, those are townhouses. For anybody who doesn't know what that is, you know, it's the Acacia townhouses from charities and sort of
That the portion, so Charities owned a large parcel. They sold off a portion of the parcel and split the lot.
Oh,
So
they did.
Charities is not the proposed, it's Dividend Housing is the proposed applicant for the 420 Acacia project.
That's
It's a-
interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so Claire, that would be a good one for us to have a look at before it gets to us. Now, I understand that you have issues because we discussed it on Monday. Issues that are specific to sort of planning issues. But it would be good if we could have a preview on that one. So is that a possibility?
It is a possibility. We can bring it forward for as early a hearing as you'd like.
No, it's
but-
not for a hearing.
Oh.
It would be just for what we've been discussing, that two of us get together and see what it is.
We could schedule an ad.
pre-hearing.
We could have if it's in the form of an ad hoc or a hearing,
Yeah, yeah.
then it counts as one of the 5 hearings. So,
Are we positive
if-
about that?
yeah, yes, I'm absolutely positive on that. Now, if 2 board members wanted to look at it and provide just some general objective feedback on kind of details you'd be looking for
That's-
in the formal, then that is fine. We can certainly assign an ad hoc to, look at that early and provide that input early.
Okay, and it wouldn't count then?
If it's not like in a hearing format, then.
Yeah, it wouldn't be in
or
a hearing
meeting
format. It's
then.
just in-house discussion sort of about it and giving us
I
a
mean, if you wanted to look at it and provide a summary of, here's some additional,
Yeah.
like
That's what I'm talking
plan
about.
sheets that we would want to see as part of the plan set, then
Uh-huh.
it doesn't count as a hearing.
Okay,
Right.
that's perfect.
Just want to state for the record that Board Member Balte, or Vice Chair Balte joined us.
Yes.
Sorry, I just want to ask some more questions about this. So I'm sort of hearing 2 different things, but I just want to make sure that
You are.
we're all clear about what's being discussed. If there's 2 members of the ARB reviewing this project and providing architectural feedback, then that will count as a hearing. Is that right?
It would not count as a hearing, but I think that we're not sure that we would want to get architectural subjective feedback from only 2 members early in the process, because it doesn't necessarily represent
The whole board.
the board's,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah, I've maintained that position as well. So I just want to make sure that we as a board are going to be able to see it all together as the first hearing. But what's the thing that you
Yes.
guys were just talking about
Right.
with the ad
It-
hoc
There's a
happening? And
second
If-
situation. Let me try to explain. To look at a project and see if there's more information, for example, that ought to be provided when it gets to the board, gets to be an important aspect of a lot of the projects that we see. If, for example, we see that it's missing sections, or it's missing elevations, or it's missing relationship to its environment, then we point out those things as missing items and expect them to be presented when the project comes to us.
I see. Okay, so it's a content review, not an
It isn't
architectural
an
review.
opinion review.
Okay,
It's a content review.
I see. Okay.
Pretty good.
And then presumably that feedback would just be provided kind of in a email format, or,
Mhm.
or you can communicate it
Communicate it to
us
you or to
you know,
whoever
in a
staff.
call or whatever. But
Mhm.
Okay.
yeah, if we were to do it as like an ad hoc, like the way we would have done 414 California, then it counts as a meeting or a hearing, and
Got
it
it.
counts toward the 5.
Okay, thank you for clarifying.
So going through the list, I commend you always about this list. Well, Jody's gone. But in particular, she was the one who sort of got this together. And it's an excellent list. And I want to remind our board here, the purpose of this is exactly what we're talking about now, to be aware of projects even before they get to us, so we have some sense of what it is that we're likely to be reviewing. Of course, that preliminary discussion, we can't talk about it except when we get to a board meeting. But here's the list, and it's for you guys to use. So far, I have a sense that this list is mostly something I'm using and commenting on, and perhaps including some additional information. So, for example, one thing that I think is important is to try to, if we give this as a title, giving the number of the application isn't as useful, perhaps, as saying, everything else you say, but you don't say exactly who the client is, who the applicant really is in here. It ought to be permeated somehow so somebody knows the address. They have the address, but they don't know exactly who it is that's presenting it. So I think that's an important to be included somewhere in here.
Sure. You can,
Turn your speaker on, please.
thank you. We can certainly add to the project description, like request for major architectural review by Dividend Housing or something to each of these. That's totally fine. Yeah.
So talking about what I see as the list is, we are seeing, for example, one project, and I want to spend just a little time on this one. Yeah. The whole of the Fry's site, for example, I'd like to know why it is that we haven't seen it as a single item for us to understand the whole item. Instead, we get it in pieces. Who made that decision?
We made that decision to try and get early feedback on the pieces, but we didn't want to move forward the cannery portion of the building until we got feedback from the Historic Resources Board. But we felt like there was going to be, it was such a large project that we wanted to give you guys an opportunity to look at each piece and provide enough time to kind of look at each piece, individually first. But now we're starting formal hearings on the project.
So everything up to date really wasn't such a formal hearing
I mean, you can do as many hearings as,
on this one.
yeah, I mean, it's a development agreement and planned community. So there's some flexibility in the hearings anyway. There's no set, it's not a housing affordability, an HAA
It's not a
project. So
state
it's not
project.
limited to 5 hearings. They're doing a whole rezoning and everything. So those early study sessions, we just felt like that would provide enough time to focus in on, different aspects of the project. But, when the formal hearings begin in April, where everything will be moving forward as one piece now. So each formal hearing we have will all be together.
Okay, that's fine. Just a comment that it seems to me that now that we've seen 2 pieces, they do relate in some way to each other. There are aspects of them that do relate, So you're presenting, the next one will be seeing the housing, the townhome part of it again, or what?
Yes, everything from moving forward will all be, the project as a
Combined?
whole.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Okay,
every aspect of it.
okay.
Mhm.
If I could, Chair Hirsch, to me, this is an example of where an ad hoc committee earlier in the process would have been helpful because they could have reported back to the board as a whole the intention of staff to divide this into 2 pieces as a preliminary hearing. And the board might have had different opinions about that. And we all would have been making the decision together, so to speak. And that's not a decision regarding the content of the project, the design, but rather the process. And I think that would have been helpful in this case. So that's why I would support what Chair Hirsch is doing about ad hoc committees on specific projects in advance, as far advanced as possible, I believe.
Thanks. So one thing I'd like you to, when we finally get through our ad hoc on a project that we've approved, it should come off the list then, right?
Sorry.
Once a project has been approved.
Approved.
Yeah,
Okay.
it would come off the list once the project is complete.
I think there's one on
Not,
there. So
not
take a
just
look.
the ad hoc, but like the entire board.
Board, yeah, no, when the
Completed.
final approval, just sort of this is just a piece of, obvious advice, just to make sure that they're off when we're finished with them.
Sure. Is there one that's still on here?
I think the El Camino project that we reviewed ad hoc, the one that the office building. I can't remember the address.
Do you have
I'm looking for it, actually.
are you talking about 3300 El Camino?
I think so.
Yes, 3300 El Camino will return with an ad hoc. We're actually hoping that will move forward, possibly on the 420 hearing.
Okay, so it's
that's it.
still active that way.
Mhm.
Oh, it
Yeah, you
hasn't.
guys made a recommendation for the project as a whole, but it is returning to the ad hoc.
Okay, I'm wrong with that. Thank you. Okay, I think we're up to date. Let me just see. Yeah, I would like to ask 3150 El Camino, which I think is the Acclaim project, right?
Correct.
That's a really an important one for us to look at, right?
Yeah.
So it would be nice if we could take a look and see what you've got on that one too. Ad hoc, same idea. What should be coming to us?
Sure. They haven't filed their formal application yet. If you wanted to take a look at everything is online under our pending projects for the SB 330 application. SB 330 pre-application will only include basic elevation drawings that haven't necessarily been refined yet, more like massing drawings and a site plan. Those are the two required sheets for a SB 330 pre-application.
So there's quite a rendering on the front of Palo Alto Online. That's
Mhm.
not part of the previous.
They probably submitted it. It's not a requirement, but they might have had renderings that they included in their pre-application. So the SB 330 pre-application has been deemed complete and a formal application has not been filed. But if you wanted to have an ad hoc look at what's been submitted to date and provide feedback on, what you would want to see as part of the plans at this point in the process, you certainly could.
Okay,
I'm sure that it would be helpful to the developer to know that as early as possible.
yes,
Sure.
that's the purpose that we're looking for here. So should I pick an ad hoc for that right now?
So, yeah, so do you want to assign an ad hoc for that
No.
one as well as 420,
Okay,
Acacia, it sounds like?
yes, why don't we do it in two?
Okay,
Kendra, I think I chose you for the next ad hoc. Would you? It's okay, great. So that's the committee, the two of
sorry,
us.
I didn't hear. So Hirsch
Kendra,
and
yes, she's
Kendra,
fine.
for which project?
Well, should we do both? You okay for both? Maybe we could do them in the same day. Huh? Okay. That would be it.
Okay. I will send links out, and I know in the last meeting we had talked about, because we assigned an ad hoc to the 800 San Antonio as well. So I'll make sure to send the submittal checklists that we work off of.
Okay,
I think that'll be helpful as guidance to you guys but any additional like details, like, we would want, a detail of like how, these materials come together or
Oh,
something along
much
that line.
later. And definitely something that the board will comment on, when it gets
But
here.
that kind of information, like if you see that and you know that you're going to want that kind of detail,
Okay,
having that kind of information early so that
Okay.
they include it in your plans, that's the kind of information we would want to know as early as possible. That way they can include it and hopefully have it during your first hearing.
Mhm.
So I'll send that link and then links to all the plan sets that we have online for these.
So what you're suggesting is that we get together on our own and take a look at what is available online, basically, and not meet actually with you or with staff about it.
I think that it would be helpful for you guys to look at it. If you would like to then set up a meeting
Fine.
with me, then we can do that to convey the information or.
For what it's worth, in principle, I think it's wise for the board to avoid or restrict as much as possible using staff's time for this kind of thing. The whole idea is for us to form our opinion, and to the extent that we can avoid using up someone like Claire's time on this by requesting a meeting, for example,
Mhm.
the whole thing will work better. Maybe the ad hoc committees could make a point of first looking at whatever's there and asking questions, and then requesting a meeting if they think that's appropriate.
This is the meeting just to let the planner know what our feedback is? I mean, how else would you want to communicate that? Just like via email?
Well, I think you could communicate it by email or a phone call. As I see it, an important chunk of the ad hoc's responsibility is to communicate back to the board at the next meeting what they're seeing. It's obviously important to work with the staff on it. What I'm trying to do is be sensitive to staff's very limited time and the city's limited resources. And I don't want us to be seen as sort of trying to grab a bunch of their time. It will just come back to us in a bad way. So I want us all to be mindful of that. And that's what I hear a lot meeting with staff in the pre-meetings here.
I think this is like a process in development at this point. And it seems to me that a list is a reasonable idea, that we put it together and that we present it to you, staff. You determine how you deal with that. We're not asking to say, well, what have you done about our list here? Because it's just information at that point. And we share it that this is the list that we sent for additional information to the board at the appropriate time. Let us work that out.
I mean, if I'm understanding correctly, the goal of this is really that we're able to provide insight on what's missing, right? That's really it. So I'm not necessarily even sure that it needs to come back to the board per se, because that might, right? It really is a communication between the ad hoc committee via Claire or the city staff, then to go back to the client, or not the client, the project, the applicant. Thank you. Thank you. I'm missing my words this morning. And so if that's the goal, then really that should be that simple. But
Yeah,
I would
sure.
say that it should be in writing. I think that my one concern is that a phone call, things may get misconstrued. I think that having a documented record and saying, this is what we reviewed, this is what is missing, send it to the city sends it to the applicant. That should be it. It should be that simple.
Yeah, that makes
Yeah.
a lot of sense.
I
to
think
me.
that's fine. We could sort of stop this. It's just, I just want to note that I personally felt there are some things that had been missing I won't even talk about the project particularly, but it sometimes is pretty obvious to us. We're architects. That's what we do. We look at drawings all the time that are missing information, and we ask for it, our own staff frequently, to provide it. So it's something that part of the process. Okay, so I think we're off of that one for the moment here. So let's see what's next. Going the wrong way. So the meeting schedule, okay, so you've really discussed that, huh? Tentative future items, agenda items.
Sorry, I already went over the future items.
So what is the next one is the ones that are on here.
The study session?
3,200 Park Boulevard is what part of that? Then it's
What
the
do you
whole, both of those pieces are coming back and this is the first
It's
formal.
one project. It's one project
Yeah,
and it
yeah,
will,
yeah.
this will be a hearing.
That'll be a hearing
on the
for that
project.
one project. So it includes the Fry's building and
yes.
the townhomes, the next one.
Correct.
Okay. And 340 Portage.
Yeah, it's all one project.
Oh,
I-
that's
I-
also
I
the same
simply
thing. I'm
put-
sorry.
Yes. yeah.
That's the agreement itself.
340 Portage, I've been putting on it because a lot of members of the public associate that with the cannery
see.
building. There
So
are
it's
a
the
lot of
same.
different addresses, but I was asked by members of the public to reference 340 Portage because when people see that, that is the address they think about with the building, so.
Okay. So Claire, I'd asked to schedule the townhomes that we've been putting a lot of time in on that. And Ying Xi is not going to be here for the next meeting, right?
Unfortunately,
Yeah.
yeah, it's a planned trip.
Yeah. So I wonder if we could push it up a bit, have it in the one after that instead of waiting until May, as you had discussed.
Well, the one after that is May. The
Okay.
The
we're there.
April 6th hearing is being noticed next week. We do need to do the council work plan. We must have the chair and vice chair elections. And the director has indicated that he does not want us pushing off projects that council is asking us to move forward. And this one in particular is under a tolling agreement. So I think, we could certainly schedule it and see if, depending on the timing that's left at the end of the hearing. That way, if there is time at the hearing, we could decide to move it forward. So we could explore that and put it at the end of the agenda for that 4/6 hearing if you'd like.
Okay.
Would you like to do that?
That's not the next hearing, but the one after, is that what
The
you're saying?
420 hearing is, oh, I'm sorry. I misunderstood what you were saying. The 420 hearing, I think we could get it on. Yes. Yeah. yeah.
But you're not going to be here.
The 420 hearing, Board Member Chen is going to be here.
Oh,
The
will.
4/6 hearing, I'm sorry, I was
So next meeting.
misreading.
okay.
So I
We'll be
think the
here.
420 hearing would be
Yeah.
reasonable. We're anticipating hopefully 123 Sherman maybe moving forward on that hearing as well. And Stanford Shopping Center project for our house, I think might move forward on that hearing as well.
Okay.
And
So-
we will have an ad hoc, I think, that day for the 3300 El Camino. So those
Okay.
are there's only
Okay.
2 items.
Great.
Yeah.
Oh, wait,
Perfect.
I have a question. So for our next hearing on 4/6,
Mhm.
are we still reviewing 3200 Park Boulevard?
Yes,
Okay, so we're not pushing that one?
we're not pushing that one.
Okay.
Okay, very good, Claire. Thank you.
Mhm.
That's perfect. So let's move to our agenda here. We have a staff presentation.
Are we moving on to the study session item?
Yeah.
So I'd like to announce that I'm going to recuse myself from this item on advice of the city attorney relative to other projects I have going in the city. So I'll step out. I'll be available. If you could let me know as soon as it's finished, I'll join the meeting again.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you, Peter. Well, that's what happens when you have active architects. You can't help it.
Do we need to provide
Yeah, yeah.
disclosures for this?
I don't know that we have to because it's a study session,
Okay.
but if you have a specific disclosure.
I mean, just as an overabundance of caution based on Peter stepping out, I do have a project that's under construction, but it's already been permitted and approved with an ADU in Palo Alto. I have pretty much recused myself from all my other projects in Palo Alto that had ADUs or anything similar. I do not have any SB9s in Palo Alto. So
You have an SB9?
no, none in,
None.
none in Palo Alto, one in
Good.
Mountain View, but not in Palo Alto.
I have nothing to disclose.
I have the similar situation as Kendra. I have ADU projects in Palo Alto, but not SB9.
Okay. I'm a retired architect.
I work for a corporate company that has no projects in Palo Alto.
So,
Good morning. I'm Amy French, Chief Planning Official. Is the agenda item to be read into the?
Yeah, Chair
Or do I
Hirsch,
do
do you
that?
want to
Aye.
read that item?
correct.
Yeah.
Thank you. Study session to review, discuss city's local objective standards for Senate Bill 9, SB 9, residential units in urban lot splits previously approved by council, along with city's SB 9 interim ordinance 5538. The Planning and Transportation Commission recommended a permanent ordinance to replace the interim ordinance of February 8th, 2023. Environmental assessment, not a project. For more information, contact Amy French. Amy French, Palo Alto.
Yes, good morning. For the listening public, we're going to be discussing the SB 9 standards. This was a state law passed in 2020 or 2021, perhaps. I'll be showing some slides and then I'll ask Emily Foley, our planner, to present some of the greater detail, as she's very much involved day to day, as she was involved at the start of this. So SB 9 is now Government Code 66411.7, the California Home Act. And what it did was create a ministerial process for 2-unit housing development on single-family residential parcels. It also enabled what we call urban lot split, which is a one-time subdivision of an existing single-family residential parcel into 2 parcels. So approvals must be based only on objective standards, and they cannot preclude construction of 2 units of less than 800 square feet. Denials are only permitted if projects do not meet objective standards or if there are specific adverse impacts on public health and safety. Limitations on how jurisdictions regulate SB 9 projects include setback and parking requirements and requirement that attached buildings must be allowed. The parcels that are affected by the SB 9 have qualifying criteria. Again, all single-family residential zoned properties within urbanized areas, except environmentally sensitive areas and environmental hazard areas, if there are no mitigations possible, as well listed historic properties and districts. Additionally, demolition is generally not permitted for rental units or deed-restricted units. So what did the city do? In 2021, which is when the state adopted SB 9, the council adopted an urgency ordinance in late December or early December, and then again an interim ordinance in January, followed by adoption of urban lot split standards, and then at that late March meeting, and then finalization of both ordinances in January and April, the SB 9 standards, which were introduced in December. So then, more recently, in February this year, the Planning Commission recommended council adopt a permanent ordinance because interim ordinances really only last a year. So there are no proposed changes to the standards going forward. The council will be presented with the ordinance and no changes to the standards at this time. soon, because again, we don't want the interim ordinance to expire. But we do have the direction from council. They asked that we visit with the Planning Commission and the ARB to, review the objective standards that we did adopt and get feedback. So the recommendation today is that the ARB review and comment on the adopted objective standards for urban lot splits. And this is again related to objective standards from the Public Works Director regarding adjacent public improvements related to those lot splits. And then review and comment on the objective SB9 standards for development. And these were based on the individual review guidelines that are, in effect for two-story homes. So these were translated, as we'll discuss during this meeting today. So again, we're here with the intent to present these to the ARB and receive feedback. And these would be considered going forward, but they're not tied to the ordinance itself. They can be modified outside that timeline for the permanent ordinance. So again, what the ARB is asked to consider is what has been adopted, but noting that staff is finding after a year in, and Emily is processing these SB9 projects, that we may have some interest in changing the standards, but we're not, again, changing them right before we go to council. This will take some time to process and consider and study. These are some of the items. I'll just pass by these, but we can come back to them later and discuss these. So just more on overview. The lot splits is ministerial as noted. There's no discretionary hearing for these. They can be placed in the RE and R1 zones. And the criteria include what's on the screen: location, parcel size, that there hasn't been a prior lot split under SB9. And then there's some other things related to protected units and owner occupied affidavits that are required. So then again, objective standards that the city has adopted previously can't conflict with the limitations imposed by SB9. They can't be physically precluding construction of up to 2 units, again, each 800 square feet. And they have these limitations. I think this is repetitive, sorry. Some of these slides came from back a couple of years ago. So these are the potential scenarios for the lot splits. And I'll let Emily take over from here and pop back in later. Thank you.
Hi, good morning. My name is Emily Foley. So what this slide is showing is basically all of the possible permutations of what's allowable on an R1 or RE zoned property. In summary, what's important here is that it's a maximum of 4 units, whether or not they are ADUs or additional units built under SB9. No, yeah, I wasn't sure how we were handling progressing the slides.
Can we, just noting the diagrams, they're very early. So there's certain situations where it seems there are 2 facades, meaning the lot is wide enough to have 2 side-by-side buildings.
So
and some of them are going to be front and back, which is a different format, right? So
right. I mean, this diagram just wanted all of the units to be visible in an easy to read way. And so obviously, yeah, realistically, not all of these units would be visible from the street in most circumstances, but we do have a wide variety of lot sizes. Really, that's what I'm probably finding the most in reviewing some of these projects is we have a wide variety of lot sizes.
gets more complex before it gets simple, right? Yeah. Okay, go ahead.
Sorry, I
Thank
have a
you.
quick question through the chair. There was a slide, Amy, that you sort of talked about potential issues, but didn't go through each of them, either now or later. I would like to hear them.
Sure. Yeah, we're trying to get through the overview and get to the kind of the meat, and then we'll have back and forth with the questions and all that, if that's possible.
Okay, great.
Okay, thanks.
So this slide shows what the different processes are for the different types of units. Currently, if you're building a one-story house, you go straight to a building permit. If you're building a one-story house in conjunction with an ADU and or JADU, that's a ministerial building permit. Two-story home, individual review. But then after that, the SB 9 process can come into play. So if you're building a two-story home with an ADU, you would have the choice to use either the current IR process that already exists or the SB 9 process to allow the SB 9 objective standards to be used for an individual review project to be processed ministerially.
So just to make everybody aware, ministerial means it doesn't come to us, for example, right? It
So
go through.
So ministerial means non-discretionary. Individual review is considered a discretionary application, but it's handled at the staff level. So there are discretionary projects that don't necessarily come to the ARB. So I wanted to separate that a little bit, but yes. So typically if you were building 3 or more units, that would be considered multifamily, and that would be something that comes to the ARB.
Right.
But under SB 9, you're allowed to build up to 4 units in these really particular situations using objective standards and a ministerial process.
And maybe this is we might be jumping ahead here, but can you explain a little bit like why in this situation of a two-story home, someone would choose IR versus IR objective versus SB 9? Like what would be the differences in the applicant choosing the different processes?
So this is an older slide, as Amy had kind of alluded to earlier. There isn't the IR objective process doesn't exist. It would really be using the SB 9 objective standards to build a two-story home with an ADU. Whereas the IR process is using the current individual review guidelines. At the time that this was established, we were hoping, and I think our end goal is that the objective standards will streamline the individual review process by taking out the discretionary kind of back and forth that happens in some of the applications. But we don't want to eliminate that as an option because if we get into going into detail on each of the objective design standards, we did our best to make sure that they were in line with the current IR guidelines, but there are cases where, some may perceive to view them as being more restrictive.
Right, so for SB 9, it seems like it's for housing development that is no more than 2 housing units on the lot, right? So I want to know then in that case, why for two-story home without ADU? It seems like it's also qualified SB 9 process instead of just IR.
The way that I believe our SB 9 ordinance is written is that it applies to the construction of 2 or more units. But that is also something that we can consider again with how the objective design standards could be applied to houses that are currently normally going through the individual review process.
I almost feel like that's sort of part 2 of a discussion where a two-story home going through the IR process, if the goal is to sort of do away with this IR process and streamline the whole situation, that applying to the two-story home, from what my understanding of it is that SB 9 really is focused on multi-units on single-family home lots. So a two-story home that's just the one thing is just falling under the sort of standard issue single-family home lots. SB 9 really only applies when there's more than one unit.
Yeah, so
That's
SB
correct.
9 is a state law that is encouraging increased housing production on single family lots. The individual review process is a uniquely Palo Alto thing, although of course most cities have some type of discretionary process for larger homes. Yeah. So this slide is also just noting that duplexes or two-family use is now allowed in the R1 or RE zone. I know that in the past, there's been some confusion about whether or not duplex means the units are inherently attached. So I just want to be clear that they can be attached or detached. As a part of an SB9 project, the property owner can choose to do a lot split. And so there are certain qualifications that this must meet, but the minimum lot size, which in Palo Alto is currently 6,000 square feet, would be reduced to 2,400 square feet. It is required to be at least a 60-40 split. So the smaller of the two lots cannot be less than 40% of the existing whole lot. The city has required that there be street frontage either by doing a flag lot or easement or just having at least 25 feet of street frontage. And then the point about the ADU is to note that, again, there's a maximum of 4 units. So if some of those are ADUs or not, it doesn't matter. The maximum is 4. This slide shows how the setbacks are changing.
I'm sorry, could we just go back one for a second here? 60-40 is the minimum projected division of the lot?
Right.
In other words, it could be 50-50, right?
Correct. Yeah.
Okay, fine.
It basically would range from being 40-60 to 60-40.
Okay, thank you.
So the setbacks are also reduced to increase the buildable area when doing an SB9 project. The blue lines show that the rear and side setbacks are reduced to 4 feet. This is consistent with the setbacks allowed for ADU construction. The front yard shown in red would not be changing either as the minimum 20 feet or the contextual front setback does still apply for properties where that is the front setback.
Let me ask on that one, just would the rear building be able to be 2 stories high?
No, our objective design standards do limit having second story within the rear yard. I would need to check exactly how it's phrased, but in general, you're not allowed to have 2-story development within that 4 to 20 feet away from the property
Exactly,
line.
yeah.
However, an ADU is allowed to be built up to 16 feet tall, even in that rear setback.
Correct, yes.
Okay.
Sorry, also second question about this. For a corner lot, would this also still apply or because I know in a corner lot, there is still a front yard and is it a
So
side
the-
yard?
Right, the street side yard is identified as a different yard type in our zoning code. I know that for ADUs, it was determined that the street side setback was considered a side and therefore could be built at the 4 feet. I do not know how that is applied to SB9. We haven't had to look at that yet.
Yeah, I think that's actually a really good question because when we've done ADUs, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but typically on a corner lot, they consider the short side, the front side, regardless of what the address is. So whatever that shorter side is your front yard.
Mhm.
And then that street side for the ADUs, we still had to respect that street side setback. No matter what, we couldn't build that ADU out to a 4 foot, at least on the property we had, but we might have had a special setback. So I know that special setbacks have to be respected no matter what.
Special setbacks are a third thing that do
Sure.
have to be respected no matter what. And you are correct that our zoning code does always identify the shorter of the two frontages as being the front.
Okay.
However, for street side setbacks for ADUs,
They're allowed to be 4 feet.
yes,
Okay.
that happened with some of the more recent updates.
And then in theory, the SB9 would follow that ADU setback of 4 feet on that street side as well.
Yeah, we're assuming that considering that that came directly from the state, that
Sure.
they would be consistent in that interpretation.
Okay,
But
and-
yeah.
Sorry, and then to just peel this back one more layer. And then if they don't split the lot, that's a different situation than, let's say they had a rectangular corner lot like this. If they did split the lot and they sort of had one is now a corner and one is now not a corner lot, that not corner lot would be required to have a front yard setback along its face. Whereas if they don't split the lot, then it actually changes the game quite a bit for what can be developed on that property and where.
So if they split that lot, they would have one corner lot and one interior lot. That new interior lot would just use the interior lot.
Right,
rules.
right. But if they didn't split it and they still wanted to do SB9, they'd be allowed to pull those out to that 4 feet along that entire length.
Yeah,
The long
that's
length.
correct. So the new rear lot, that now the front yard would become
Got it.
what was the
Right.
street side yard, and therefore you have to respect the front yard setback of 20 feet. So it does.
Yeah, I mean,
Right.
it would depend a lot on that configuration of that corner lot,
Yes.
because you could split the lot without it changing which one's the front setback. So I
Right.
wasn't quite following that.
Well, no, and I guess the thing I'm trying to get at here is that, you know, in certain situations with something like this, these rules, the way that they are written, has a lot of unintended consequences, right? One of them being that in this example of a corner lot, you may be accidentally or unintentionally encouraging someone to split or not split the property based on how these rules are written, how they can best capture the use of the lot. So I just want us to sort of, as we move forward with some of these, like do our best to be as mindful as we can of some of these issues. Because that would be a pretty notable difference on some of these corner lots. And I know that a lot of what we're trying to cover here today is corner lots, pie-shaped lots, odd-shaped lots, huge lots, right? The standard issue rectangular lot, we kind of know what's what. And it's these exceptions to the rule that are really going to be where the meat of the pie is, so to speak.
I wanted to just jump in. I really appreciate all of the thinking and the, studying on this that's already happened before you came today too. But what I also want to say is that the Planning Commission recently, recommended more changes to the ADU ordinances. We went to council in December with another ordinance because of state law. Our intention is to get feedback from HCD on the most recent changes we took to Planning Commission so that we can kind of not be in this iterative process with the HCD.
Totally.
And
yeah.
before we go to the council, I think that's how we're going to proceed. But it's a little bit still, we should come back to the ARB and clearly explain everything.
Yeah.
Once we have a less of a moving ordinance situation.
Yeah.
Because there was some state law adopted in 2022
Right.
that on ADUs.
And just for what it's worth, I feel like part of the reason that this is such a moving target is that the ADU standards are relatively new. I mean, those started in what, 2020? And
2021 and 2022. I mean,
right,
we
and they just
getting
keep
state
changing and
laws.
changing. And
Yes.
then there's now SB9. And so all of this together is making things quite complicated, and we're doing our best to keep up. Now, that being said, I don't know if we should keep interrupting you during
Well,
your
no, I think-
conversation. I'll let you finish your presentation. But thank you.
That was actually a good transition because the next slide is kind of
Could-
one of those consequences.
Just a question is on the objective standards, which we really haven't gotten into here. On that corner lot issue, do the objective standards recognize that these ADUs on the corner are going to have an elevation facing one way or another? Are they,
So ADUs are not inherently part of an SB9 project, and ADUs are still going to be following the current ADU laws. So the objective standards do not do design for ADUs necessarily, in the same way that when we're looking at an individual review project now, and there is an ADU included in one of those, we recognize that based on state law, ADUs are always ministerial projects that kind of just need to check those boxes of what the zoning code requires for ADUs.
Okay, so maybe I misstated it. Maybe I should have said a lot split in which one becomes a regular lot with 2 side yards. The other one is a corner lot.
Right, so.
How do you determine which side is the elevation of the?
So there are always, the zoning code, again, always defines the front yard as being the shorter of the 2 lot frontages. And so it's possible that in a lot split that would change it. It's also possible that the lot split wouldn't change which one's the front. If it's 60 feet on one side and 100 feet on the other, and you split it into 2 30 by 100s, your front stays the same.
Good, Emily. Great. Okay, understood.
Right. Additionally, when you are eventually looking at the objective design standards,
Okay,
individual review guideline 4 refers to facade composition and I believe does acknowledge that you should take advantage of your dual street frontages to present,
thank you.
things with windows. So this slide shows what the allowable floor area calculation changes when you do a lot split. Again, this applies more for larger lots because the way that we currently calculate floor area is it's 45% of the first 5,000 square feet of lot area plus 30% of the lot in excess of that 5,000. And so here, when you have a 6,000 square foot lot, the allowable floor area is 3,350. It appears that this was including an additional 800 square feet for the ADU. That additional 800 does not apply to SB9 projects. But because these lots are, when you split it into 2 3,000 square foot lots, 45% of each, the lot area increases slightly in terms of what is allowable.
So moving on now to the objective standards for the development of the end product, the homes. These were based upon the individual review guidelines that we've had loads of experience with since they were adopted in 2001 and changed over time. So we use them. Thank goodness we had something already prepared that helped us with this effort to quickly turn around in December of 2021, the objective standards. So the guidelines, some of you may be familiar with, having done individual review projects in Palo Alto, are for site planning, neighborhood compatibility, resolution of architectural form, massing and roof lines, visual character of street-facing facades and entries, and privacy. So each of these IR guidelines is broken down into key points, and these SB9 objective standards pretty much just took those key points and converted them into objective standards. There was a little bit of massaging of that because it's complicated, but we did have our individual review, Arnold Memorella, some of you know, helping us with refining those into the objective standards. Here's some examples. We have IR Guideline 1 that translated into site planning with the key point 5 about locating an upper floor well back from the front facade and or away from the side lot lines if the home is adjacent to a small or one-story home. So then this is the translation into what we call the contextual side massing step back. So we had to refine it with numbers to make it objective. So I'll let Emily take over from here. We have a couple of examples just from guidelines 1 and 2. And we have the others if anyone wants to get into details on the other standards. So
so we took, 5 guidelines, each of which had about 5 key points and turned them into 70 something objective standards. So we're not going through all of them in this presentation, but I'm happy to answer any questions about any of them. And just to highlight a few examples, this one for the contextual side massing step back where a home on an abutting lot across a street lot line or a side lot line is single story or has a second floor area less than 500 square feet. So what we're identifying is that as a part of our contextual analysis, we pay special attention to when the homes adjacent to a new two-story house are single story, especially in a context like an Eichler neighborhood where they're very low single stories. And we're also including when a home only has a very small second story, less than 500 square feet, as being more similar to a single story context than a two-story context. So that's the first half of that.
So I have a question about that. I mean, a single story house, there was one next to my house when I first bought the lot. And it was changed to a two-story house eventually. Why are we so concerned about that situation? Because it's certainly flexible here in Palo Alto. People do tear houses down. One-story houses frequently are torn down and rebuilt as two-story houses.
Yes, and when
Why
they
is such an
are,
exception made for a single-story house that's adjacent to one that you're developing, let's say?
based on public feedback, it was something that residences are concerned about, just having that massing transition between single-story houses and two-story houses not be too overwhelming, or to have a two-story house that is perceived as being out of scale compared to the houses next to it.
Okay, maybe we could talk about specific situations there too. But let's go on from that. This is all of 1.1. Is this what we're talking about? 1.1?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if was this included in the packet?
Yes. I believe
Okay. So each individual review key point, as I had mentioned earlier, there's about 25 of them, were broken down into key points. And so this one that we're trying to discuss, is 1.5B, but 1.5 individual review key point 1.5 was divided into objective standards 1.5 A, B, C, and D. And so this is just an example of how we made that transition and took something subjective, which was locate the upper floor well back from the front facade and away from the sides, into something that says when adjacent to a single-story home, the second floor must be 20 feet away from the side, or if the second floor is located within 20 feet of the side lot line, it shall step back the upper floor from the lower floor on that side at least 7 feet for at least 50% of the depth of the structure. So because the lots potentially, as the result of an urban lot split, may be narrower than a standard lot, it's just trying to discourage having a two-story wall plane. If your side setback is less than 20 feet, which is going to be in virtually all cases, then that second floor needs to be stepped 7 feet back for at least half of the total length of the house.
Side yard setback is 20 feet?
No, if if the house is within 20
feet of the front property
Right. And so
line.
that's what I'm saying is like, except in these cases where like in the RE district, you do have huge side yard setbacks. This is going to apply to standard, more suburban Palo Alto.
So let me understand then, if it's 20 feet back from the front yard, then the second story on facing the side yard where there's a single story house has to be set back further than the daylight plane, for example.
So you see how there's the diagram to the side, this on the slide, this is taken from the individual review guidelines, but it's showing, the light gray is the first floor footprint of that middle house, and the dark gray is where the second story is located. And so if you look at the sides, that second floor is stepped in from the sides compared to the first floor.
If I can step in for a second, I've heard you several times, Chair Hirsch, say 20-foot front yard setback. We're not talking about the front yard setback of 20 feet in this example that we're discussing. It's a 20-foot
It's normal to have a 20-foot setback from the
front
front
setback.
yard.
We're not talking about
We're
front
not
setback.
talking about that. I understand it's
Okay.
a side yard setback, which is in the second diagram here, for example, right? It's the middle diagram. So the second story of a house here, a new house at this point, because there's a one-story house next to it, has to be set back 20 feet from a side yard.
No, it has to be set back 7 feet. It's acknowledging that if you had a context where the first floor was more than 20 feet away from a side, again, that would be a very rare occurrence, then this wouldn't apply.
So the long and the short is basically in this context, all of these houses are going to be within 20 feet. So they're saying since the main house is within 20 feet, the upper level has to step back 7 feet from the first
The
floor.
upper
The upper
floor.
portion. In the large sort of Palo Alto Hills lots where the side yard setback, the building may be already 30 feet from the side yard, they can build straight up. They don't have to set back 7 feet. So I think that's, if I'm understanding correctly, that's the context of this. Now, just sort of piggyback on this while I've got the microphone. I'm also noticing that this rightmost diagram, if you flip flop that daylight plane and put it on that house on the rightmost side, it wouldn't comply with the daylight plane. Why
These-
is that?
So these illustrations were originally from the development of the individual review guidelines. So these are older,
Okay.
and it recognizes the existing context at that point in time where there were two-story houses that were built.
Not regarding daylight planes.
Right.
Got it.
So the examples often on these pictures show an existing house that maybe didn't have review. Another thing I thought might say, because it could be confusing, in the RE district, the IR guidelines do not apply for regular two-story homes, only in the R1 and some other situations where adjacent to R1. So like Emily was saying, it's pretty rare you're going to have a 20-foot setback on the side in the R1, but because SB9 applies as well to RE, whereas IR guidelines do not, that's where we're getting kind
That's super helpful. Thank
of
you.
a little bit more math.
Okay, I think I drew a little diagram here I think this is my understanding is if the house is within 20 feet of your property line, then the upper story is 7-foot setback from the edge of the house, wherever it is in relationship to the side yard.
Good question.
So if the house, say, for example, is 10 feet from the side yard, that triggers I'm within 20 feet from the side yard.
Right.
And then that upper story has to be 7 feet from that existing edge of the lower level. So
Right.
if it's at 10 feet, then it's going to be at 17 feet from the side yard.
And actually, I would argue that that sort of penalizes somebody that's already built farther away from the setback, right? If their setback on that exact situation that Usma's talking about is actually only a 6-foot setback, then they're being held to a higher standard than maybe they should be. So that's a good clarifying question. If that's noted from the setback, or is that 7-foot step back from the existing wall of the house, or is it from the setback line?
It is from the existing or proposed wall of the house on the first floor. You are correct that obviously in cases where, maybe you have a rear garage, so you have a 8 or 9 or 10-foot wide driveway rather than a 6-foot minimum setback, that will change the amount of setback
Right.
by 2 or 3 feet.
Yeah, I feel like, I don't know if we're supposed to be giving opinions at this point, but I feel like that sort of unfairly penalizes people. And that again, it becomes much more subjective than objective. And if that standard is set that if the house is built within 20 feet of the property line, then it should be off of their setback, right? Because you're right, if they put a driveway, and especially thinking about these lot splits, and these are going to be flag lots, there's going to be a lot going on there. If they have to have a 10-foot wide driveway down the entire side of their house, and then they have to put another 7 feet back from that, they might have, they might all of a sudden not be allowed to build a second floor because you're required to have a 15-foot by 15-foot second floor minimum, right? So I'm concerned that there's some unfair penalization of existing standards, things like that. So some of this clarification I think would be helpful.
That's great. And I would add in that, recall that the R1 zone also has combining districts, some of which are 10-foot setbacks as the minimum setback for the sides, as opposed to the 6 feet. And then some have an 8-foot minimum setback. So there's different R1 zones. And then, of course, we have, again, the RE, which allows SB9.
So this is basically turning into a full dissertation.
It also ends up combining interestingly with the other ones. And I don't think we're going to get into it right now, but like if you're adjacent to a single story house, you also have to be an additional 2 feet under the typical daylight plane. We're also not taking into account that under SB9, you could be using 4-foot side setbacks instead of the 6 or the 8 or the 10. So just because this one is limiting it 7 feet, where the daylight plane hits could be further restrictive or not. And so
I guess my overall question is, how do we just simplify some of this?
Yes.
we would
same
love
thing.
it to be simplified.
Because right
It
now
seemed to
it's
me
feeling
that-
like,
Why would you change the daylight plane concept from at
yeah,
all?
Because typically in our current application of the individual review standards in response to how it is currently subjective with things like well back from side lot lines and illustrations where it's not touching the daylight plane, it's been interpreted over the last, 5 plus 12, 20 years to be additionally reduced from the daylight plane.
I have to
Okay,
say, I
I
have a
think-
substandard lot on my house, but I have a held to the daylight plane as the controlling dimension of the second story. It was critical. I wouldn't have been able to build a house the way it is at all if I didn't have the right to build to the daylight plane. And I find it sufficiently distant from the neighbors. So I don't know why this happened along the way.
and one other thing just to bring up is that there's a city right nearby, one of our neighbors, I love them. And they have an ordinance that's very similar to this, where the second story always has to be stepped back in the front, on the sides. And what ends up happening is you drive around that city and you see a lot of cake toppers, right? Where it looks like you've got a wedding cake below and the little cake topper on above. And I'm inclined to say that when you allow the daylight plane to sort of be the ruling factor here, instead of these setbacks of an additional 7 feet here, an additional thing here, the goal is to respect your neighbor. The goal is to not be an imposition in massing or in, hogging daylight, in hogging wind, things like that, right? So the daylight plane is highly effective in this. And if that, if you've got a setback and you've got a daylight plane, that volume should be enough. Whereas this additional restriction of a 7 foot from this, from that, can cause a lot more issues than it's worth. And I don't think it actually benefits anybody. And I think it, in fact, penalizes the homeowner and can create some funky architecture. So we
I was
end up
going
with
to
these
say,
little
it just
cake
makes
toppers
our life all that much more difficult.
Well, yeah, and it just feels like it's a little bit of, again, the applicant, the client, whoever is trying to hit a moving target. Whereas if you go with a setback and a daylight plane and call it a day, that buildable envelope should just be respected, and that should be it. And it can stay that simple. My 2 cents on it.
And my 2 cents, so that makes 4.
We should probably let them keep going. I don't know if you.
How do you feel about that one?
Are we giving comments right now or are we still?
we are.
We're not through our presentation.
finish.
This is an example. That's all right. I mean,
Well,
it's
yeah.
it's a
We'll never
study
get back
session.
to it if we don't do it now.
Well, we should keep a note because we all
We
have to
might.
give comments, right?
Well,
And then
okay.
we also need to hear from the public if there is
Yeah.
comments from the public.
Okay.
So
I just want to note, there's, again, because of the ADU laws that we get handed down from the state, things happen. Like they can say, well, you can't impose the daylight plane on ADUs. So these kinds of things happen each year that we get feedback and pushback and what have you. So anyways, moving back to the presentation, if we can give one or two more examples and finish, and then we can have the public, right? Okay.
Yeah. Maybe just go to,
Next.
or the one after this one.
We had other examples, but we can blow through these.
Yeah, so this one is a lot more straightforward than maybe some of the others. This one's just simply saying when you are building your new house under the SB 9 standards, the height of the first floor roof eave should not exceed 18 inches above the average height of the first floor eaves of the adjacent houses. In the cases where there is a second story, then this also requires the first floor roof edge to be at least 15 feet before the second story starts. So this is another one that further restricts the second floor area, again, in combination with a lot of the other objective standards. And then the last sentence of it is just acknowledging that in cases where there is a flood zone, then instead of being 18 inches, it's 24 inches to allow more room to be in compliance with the flood zone, since your finished floor height is likely required to be higher. And then this one is based off of individual review guideline 2 key point 5. Again, to locate smaller volumes in front of large volumes to reduce the impact of the second story massing compared to the first story massing. And so it requires at least one single story building form, not including the garage, that's no more than 16 feet in height, and at least 18 feet by 12 feet of floor area to be placed on each street-facing building side. So Chair Hirsch, to your earlier comment about how it's handled on corner lots, this requires there to be some type of one-story element on both street-facing sides. Again, this is to limit the amount of just flat two-story wall planes that there are on any given house.
So that was, again, examples. We can go back to those, but just to finish up, I guess, our presentation, we have a couple more slides. This one on the Palo Alto Municipal Code, Title 21 is for subdivisions. And so this is an older slide, again, saying what the existing ordinance says. So this is when we were coming back through and modifying those sections of the subdivision ordinance. So this is just kind of, again, an overview that we can require lot splits to have access to adjoin the public right of way. So that's what we did with the standards. And we looked at 3 types of lot splits when we were going through that. And as Emily was noting, it depends on the street frontage that dictates the way the design of the subdivision goes. So here's some pictures, again, kind of more details showing the 3 types of subdivisions we were looking at when we came up with the ordinance for council adoption: the side-by-side, the flag lot, and the flag lot with easement. So in an R1 lot, typically we, in the way that for a single family home, you cannot do a flag lot on an R1 property. If you do, for whatever reason, which is such as historic preservation, we have an incentive to allow for flag lots in an R1 for historic preservation if there's a historic house on the property. Then there's variation on that, but it's typically a 15-foot flagpole. So for the SB 9 standards, we used the 10-foot wide minimum easement for clearance of an automobile driving down that flagpole. So, and then this is just another topic basically, but Public Works has standards that are objective standards, but the Public Works Director can modify those similarly that we can modify the SB 9 standards that we're talking about today that have been adopted outside of that ordinance process. So So the Director of Public Works can modify the public improvement standards that have been subjective for subdivisions. And we're trying to keep, again, these SB9 projects ministerial, including the urban lot splits. Just to also let you know, we're almost done with our presentation, that handouts are in process. We have a firm, Urban Planning Partners, that's preparing handouts. This is literally hot off the press, got this morning in an email. It's not finished, but to try to help the public see what the opportunities are, applicability, and so on, to get onto our webpage. Here's another handout that's trying to clarify, what we're talking about here: ministerial, do this, do that, requirements, eligibility, this kind of thing, and some links that will help people, explore state laws and stuff like that. So yeah, that concludes our presentation, and we can go back to any number of slides after, I guess, public.
I just want to say thank you for the presentation. This is a lot of information. It's pretty complicated to go back and forth on it. And I sincerely appreciate the time and effort you guys have put into putting all of this together. So who wants to start with comments?
Can I just add one point of clarification, and perhaps Emily, please correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is that we have these objective standards, which if we don't have anything, we can't apply anything to some of these SB9 projects. However, I believe if they can't meet the SB9 objective standards, it doesn't necessarily mean they can't design how they want to. It just means that they have to choose to go through our discretionary process to do that. So it's impossible to think of every design. We've certainly had some projects coming in that said, well, I really want to do this kind of roof line, and it just doesn't fall into these exact objective standards, but it's not an unreasonable design. They can choose to still move forward with the design that they want to move forward with. They just have to choose to do that through a discretionary process. And so it's about kind of trying to strike a balance. Like, we certainly want to streamline the process for housing. We don't want to create more work for staff, but also having strict enough standards that we feel comfortable allowing people to move forward and know that they're still going to fall within what we would see as reasonable under our IR process, which I think has been fairly successful in terms of coming up with, good designs for our community, and kind of retaining some ability to work with applicants that maybe can't meet every objective standard.
So yeah, I mean, this is a sort of, you guys work in present housing at this scale all the time here in the city and in adjacent areas. It's a question of how do we look at these kind of standards, As I look through it from a sort of an outside view, because I'm coming from another environment entirely, but I have had that experience of taking one house all the way through in the discretionary process. And I was very happy with it in the end. It worked out very, very well.
Chair, should we make sure that there's no public comments and questions?
So we could, yeah, sure.
Because
Let's
it's a
do
public
that. But
hearing.
what I'm getting at here is how to approach these particular details in what are the objective standards. How do we respond to them? Are you looking for us not to respond to them and just to say that's fine? Or are you looking for us to look at them critically and come back with comments item by item?
Certainly not looking for you guys to not provide comments. Your feedback is important. Examples of just what you've already pointed out, that, we have the 7-foot setback, but where does that start from? And does that really make sense? Does it make sense to have a setback in addition to a daylight plane? That's important feedback that I think will be something we need to explore. just one more thing, Board Member Thompson had asked about, some of the suggestions that we were thinking about of possible changes. As we've gone through the past year, I think in particular, the larger lots, especially in like the RE zone, there is possibly a lot more potential with those lots than what's been restricted under these objective standards right now. And so I think there could be some more opportunities either in the lot split standards and or the objective standards that may speak better to some of these larger lots and the potential for that to be able to provide more housing.
Yeah, this first one's actually within the ordinance itself, rather than in the objective standards. So I wanted to call out that one kind of specifically. Currently, again, taking a more conservative view when we were initially drafting the ordinance and just making sure that the state law was being like met to the letter. In cases where 3 or 4 units are being developed simultaneously, it states that the maximum unit size is 800, but this in particular makes it unattractive to potential, I don't want to say developers because one of the requirements is being the homeowner of the units, but having that saying, if you have a 20,000 square foot lot saying, oh, all you can do is build 4 800 square foot units, doesn't encourage development.
So we put back on the screen some of these considerations. Now, if we'd like to talk through some of these, maybe after, if there's any public, I don't know if Veronica can verify yes or no on that point. Anyone from the public, just so we know?
No, I have not received any speaker cards or raised hands.
Okay, so certainly we have the whole gamut of possible comments on all of the standards that you have in a paper handout there. But then we also have what's on the screen, which is noodling, some things that might want to be discussed more thoroughly and perhaps in a future meeting, once you've had time to digest all of this.
I think before people go into all those details about all those objective standards, the first thing people want to know whether they are qualified for the SB9. So could you please clarify like several scenario, like in packet page 20, there's conditions may disqualify if a project from flood risk areas. So we know there are lots of houses in Palo Alto which are actually in flood zone, but actually in the objective standards, I think you mentioned in case when houses are in the flood zone, then there may be, say, like extra height is allowed. So could you please clarify whether all the houses in flood zone in Palo Alto are all qualified for SB9 projects?
Yes, so the exact language in the code says that the subject parcel cannot be located within the 100-year flood zone or unless public works standards can be met. And so those public works standards are really just having that finished floor outside of the flood zone elevated. The majority, if not all, of flood zone R1 properties are usually able to meet those requirements.
And another thing is, say if a property that has an ADU that already been built and owners want to build a new 2-story house, so can they do the SB9 in this case?
Sorry, that's an interesting question, because if there's already a small house and an ADU, can they split the lot and then on the new split portion build the 2-story and have that go under SB9 rules and regs, or would that have to go under IR rules and regs?
They would be able to use SB9 objective standards for that, yes.
It wouldn't be considered an ADU anymore.
Well, it depends. I mean,
The existing.
those
right.
were
If-
two different situations.
Were they? Sorry, I thought it was the same situation.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So if there's an existing property, let's say it's
Mhm.
10,000 square feet, just for fun. there's a small-ish house on it and a detached ADU.
Right.
Can they split that 10,000 square feet, keeping the house and the ADU on one property, thus creating a new property that's completely bare, wanting to build a two-story house on that, and that two-story house, because of the lot split is at SB9, that two-story house would then fall under SB9 rules and regs as opposed to an IR.
Yes, so any unit
Okay.
built on a property that is the result of an urban lot split would follow the SB9 standards.
Thank
Mhm.
you.
So which means if they don't do the urban split, then they cannot go, they will still go with the IR process. Is it
Well,
correct?
if it's an existing lot, well,
Mhm.
and that's why I was saying I wasn't totally sure if you were talking about the same situation, because are you talking about a lot where there's a single family house and an ADU? Is that a replacement unit of the current main house or in addition to?
It's tear down the existing main house and build
Yeah.
a new one,
So
but keep the
Right.
ADU.
based on how it's currently written, I believe they would have the option to do either.
Okay, and another thing actually confused me is, well, we hear people living in town for decades that they're concerned about all those new houses, big houses building in town, and we see the languages like we put lots of restrictions for when there is SB9 next to a single story house, then there are still lots of restrictions. However, for the process we see, it seems like if people just want to build a smaller house, say a regular new two-story house, then they will spend more time on IR review. However, if they want to get it faster, which will make them make things happen faster. So which means although we hear the comments from the neighbors that we don't want houses to be larger and larger, but then it ends up with homeowners or developers will choose the shorter way, the faster way to build a larger house along the street.
So currently, just to talk about the process in a little bit more detail, an individual review project on average takes between 3 and 6 months. It's usually 2 to 3 rounds of staff review. And then there is the possibility that neighbors would initiate a hearing process. But the majority of them do go through just at the staff review level, and then they proceed to their building permits. But it is a 2-step process between the individual review and the building permits. For the SB9 projects, although in terms of formal applications, there is only the building permit and there's no ability for neighbors to appeal and start a hearing process, because there are so many objective standards, we are requiring the projects to go through a preliminary process, which in terms of feedback, everyone said that they are in favor of that process. They do want feedback on whether or not the house has met the objective standards before they go through and get the structural calcs and all of that. And so we haven't done too many yet. You know, we had a slide that talked about how many that we've had processed. We have 3 that are current, or we have 2 that are currently in building permit, but it's 3 permit numbers because each unit has its own permit number. We're not yet seeing a process, the length of process isn't substantially different yet. Obviously, we do want these to become shorter, but I think that the objective design standards do need some refining before we get to the point where somebody just building a new 2-story single family house by itself is viewing this process as preferable.
Thanks. It's complicated.
So if I can ask the board, how do we want to do this? Like, I know that for myself, I read through these and I have sort of a list of items that I'd like to tackle from sort of what was, the lengthy key points, right? So I've definitely got like key point by key point, a list of the ones that I would like to address, but I don't know if it's, how do you guys want to go through what our thoughts are on this?
I'm okay if you want to go first and go through your key points. I think it'll be helpful for us to hear and then.
Okay.
Yes, I mean, I was thinking the same thing. Why, how do we review here
Right.
in detail?
Okay.
So why don't you do all of, 1.1 to 2, and then we pass it around and then get
So
to,
I can promise you, I don't have comments on all of them.
okay,
And-
no, that's fine.
So I've got
Yeah.
several that I've got some sort of issues with. So just starting right out of the gate, I think one of the biggest problems we've got is that a lot of these we're trying to make conform to pie-shaped lots, irregularly shaped lots, flag lots, and sort of any of those quirky lots, right? The rectangular ones, this will all go through just fine. We'll figure it out. It's going to become pretty routine. So just sort of specifically, when I go through my comments, a lot of these are sort of trying to find exceptions for pie-shaped lots, flag lots, and irregularly shaped lots. So if you guys are ready, I'm just going to start going down a list. Number one is that they are trying to encourage shared driveways. And so in an effort to do that, it might be best to have a 20-foot wide maximum for that one. So on just key point 1.1A, I think it would be an encouragement to allow a 20-foot wide driveway if it's shared, because then that way you also have two bypassing lanes that are a little bit more generous than a 9-foot and 9-foot passing each other, which is doable, but just if it's going to be shared, it's nice to have a little bit more wiggle room. And then keeping 1.1B as an 18-foot, right? So then that way we're sort of trying to encourage a shared driveway by allowing a little more space. Planting strips are fine, driveways are fine, 4 feet back. In 1.2A, this is the one that I've got sort of a big issue with. It's saying that attached or detached garages and carports must be located a minimum of 5 feet behind the forwardmost plane of the front facade or 3 feet behind the forwardmost plane of a street side facade. This is highly problematic for pie-shaped lots, and I speak from experience. My entire facade is my garage. There is no other option, right? If I needed to put a garage in the back of my property, I'd be taking up a huge portion of my front just getting a driveway back there. So I'd like for the board and council to consider that maybe we just add an addendum here saying pie-shaped and flag lots are exempted from this requirement. Oh, I can see the standard for a rectangular lot makes sense. Even a large irregularly shaped lot could still be applied to, but when you've got that narrow street frontage, there's got to be an allowance that the garage just is the facade. There's really not much else you could do without consuming a massive portion of our property. Again, keeping that garage at the front facade there and making sure that it's not a long, extensive driveway allows for recirculation of rainwater into the earth. That, you know, the facade maybe isn't as pretty, but there's a lot of benefits to that. So I would encourage that one. On 1.2B, just saying that except it may be 12 feet wide. So is that supposed to be a 12 feet wide minimum garage? And no more. So the minimum is 12 feet, the maximum is 30% of the total facade. That makes sense.
Sorry,
Sorry, were you asking for clarification?
The 12 feet is not for the garage. It's for the portion of the house.
Okay, an attached or detached garage carport facing the street shall be no more than 30% of the total facade width facing that street, except that it may be 12 feet wide in any circumstances. So, I mean, that's kind of what's necessary.
So if
So
you're
1.2.
building a house from setback to setback,
Yes,
your garage is always allowed to be at least 12 feet. But if your garage,
Correct.
but if your buildable frontage is more than 36 feet,
right.
then your garage cannot take up more than 30% of it.
Right. And I guess the reason I'm sort of nitpicking that standard is that saying that the 12-foot minimum is required for a garage, because you don't want someone building a 9.5-foot garage, right? Trying to comply with this 30%, right? You
Right.
actually want to encourage them to build an actual buildable garage.
Right, no, that's what this is saying.
Okay.
The minimum garage size is 12 feet.
That's what I'm trying to get
Yeah.
in here, because it doesn't quite read that way, and I hate to be nitpicky, but it's saying it can be 12 feet. And my comment is that it should be 12 feet minimum, because anything less than that isn't really a garage,
Okay.
it's bike storage.
So don't use the word may. is
I
what
mean,
you're
it's, I'll just weigh in on that. It's difficult. We have a 10-foot clearance on the interior of a garage.
Yes,
So, depending on, they have a shared wall with the house,
perfect.
it could be somebody could eke in there something that still met that 10-foot clearance that was less than 12, but
Okay, but as long
it's
as that,
saying we're not going to make them do less than 12.
got it. Okay, and then so basically, as long as that 10-foot clearance interior is met, and it's a 10-foot by 20-foot interior clearance? Okay. So as long as that's met, it's counted as garage. If it's 9.5 feet, it's no longer counted as a garage. Got it. Okay, fair enough. I only have-
I'm sorry, may I ask a question here? So basically for the 1.2B, the garage width, then which means we discourage 2-car garage at the front, at the street front, right? Because if we want to meet no more than 30%
Right.
of the total facade width, which means the lot width need to be 70 feet wide at minimum.
Right.
But
That doesn't really work either. I'm in
Yeah.
agreement with that, that if you want a 2-car garage and you're maxing people out at 30%, they have to have a pretty wide house to accommodate that. And again, pie-shaped flag lots, I think should just be straight up exempted because there's no way that's going to happen. But unless we're trying to discourage 2-car garages, I just think that I completely agree. I think that needs to be revisited.
Yeah, so we historically have discouraged 2-car garages. The way that the key point, the way that it was originally phrased in the individual review guidelines is to locate garages to be subordinate to and minimally visible and significantly less prominent than the house. As a result of that, 1-car garages are encouraged. Doing rear garages are also encouraged. We also have a contextual garage setback where if the majority of the houses on the street have rear garages, then a new house is required to have that rear garage. There's a handful of blocks that have alley access. In those cases, you need to have your garage off of that alley. Additionally, because of the way our floor area calculation is structured, where covered parking counts towards the floor area.
Right.
And by the zoning code, you're only required to have 1 covered parking and 1 uncovered parking. That also discourages 2-car garages because many homeowners don't want that additional 200 of square feet to go towards parking when it can be incorporated into the house.
Fair enough. Okay. Yingshi,
I
did you
think
want
that's
to
it.
follow up on that?
Yeah, so I was just thinking about, so for SB9, it could be different than the traditional single family, right? Because we allow maximum 4 units on the lot. So maybe
2 units on each lot, so only 4 units if you do a lot split under SB9.
okay,
4, you can't do 4 units.
2 primary, 2 ADUs, like that.
Oh, I'm sorry, I misunderstood then.
The
Okay.
laws change so quickly that it's
Okay.
hard to keep up.
Yeah. Are we good on this point?
Yeah, so with more units, then, which means we need more parkings in this case.
Right. Nobody's accounting for parking, which is,
That's what I was going to say.
Yep.
The reality is going to be quite different than that. In fact, who uses their garage for their car anymore?
well, in these instances, we're gonna, you sort of envision this lot that gets split into 4 units. Maybe they have a shared driveway down the middle and you get the cottage style 1, 2, 3, 4 all splaying off of this one driveway. They're gonna have to have covered carports. Thank you. They're gonna have to have some place to put their cars, whether it's, a parallel parking down the driveway or something. But when you're sharing a property with 3 other families, this parking needs to be accounted for. So maybe it's not necessarily 2-car garages or whatnot. Maybe it's the aesthetic is that we don't like to stare at garage doors. Okay, I get it, but the parking should be considered to some extent and where these people are going to be parking their cars. Because otherwise it's just going to be every street curb is going to be taken up by parking.
And another consideration is, electric vehicles.
Oh, yeah.
That have charging stations. So
That are now required.
we
Right.
we have an electrification ordinance that we took to the planning commission that will be continuing on to the council.
Okay.
And we're working on some stuff regarding noise because that includes equipment, heat pump, water heaters and such.
Yeah.
But that's off topic. Just to say that, who uses garages? Many people may use garages to have their vehicle charge.
Yeah, yeah,
More and
to have
more.
the vehicle in charge and actually to your point, to have their furnaces and hot water heaters and things like that. So, yeah. All right, I'm going to try and keep moving down my list. 'cause I
No,
wanna-
maybe we should, anybody else have comments about item 1? I had one that walkway separations have to have a planting strip. What is the requirement for that? In my situation, I have a 10-foot paved area for my car, and I have a canopy adjacent to the house and an open area behind it for the second car. If I had one, but I only have one. And immediately adjacent to the driveway away from the property line side, I have a walkway, and the walkway is made of separated concrete pieces with stones, black stones between, because that's the format for the landscaping. And from that point on, it's all planting in the inside, on the other side. Why is it necessary to have a planting strip there?
It is to provide visual separation between what's driveway and what's walkway. It's also to limit the entire space from being used as driveway.
Okay, so it could be the way I have it, because it's pretty clear that one is a walkway. It's differently paved. And it looks pretty nice because it relates nicely to the concrete portion as well, so there's some, so I don't see that. There's a very specific element there that really I don't think has to be there specifically for every house. I question that sort of specificity in a
Okay.
lot of this.
Yeah, some of this feels like an overreach where it's like, why is there a 4-foot planting require? Just some of that's like, it doesn't feel necessary.
Do you feel that the width of that is unnecessary, or simply the standard in general is
I
unnecessary?
guess the standard in general, I mean, you can imagine that you'd have a driveway and then maybe there's like concrete pads with grass in between them. That's clearly a
Sure.
walkway and not a driveway. The concrete that we use for a driveway is a different thickness than the concrete we use for a walkway. It can't support the weight of a car without cracking, right?
Right.
Sometimes. So there's some of this that just feels like it's overly specific and not really necessary, right? Like, why is it that an SB9 project needs to account for a planting strip between a walkway and a driveway when it may never come up? It may be too tight, right? We're sort of enforcing these 4-foot width requirements in properties where we might be accounting for every inch that we can get.
You bet.
So it just feels overly specific and restrictive, in my opinion. I agree with that.
I
So I'm-
believe that one in particular, there is a zoning code reference. I'm trying to pull it up, but we discuss maximum widths of driveways and maximum widths of walkways and pathways in the zoning code somewhere.
Certainly, comments like these are very helpful for the practical development of SB9 projects. If there are considerations that we should be looking at our zoning code as well as the SB9 standards,
Thank you.
those are also helpful. We, from time to time, do comprehensive zoning updates. Well, we're doing zoning updates every year for one reason or another. So those we can take and put your comments down when they relate to zoning as well.
Thank you.
It seems
Okay.
like that one's coming from the IR guideline of minimizing driveway paving impacts in order to highlight yards and pedestrian entryways. So I can kind of see where that came from, just because I think it would separate those two things.
Yeah, I mean, in
Um,
theory, I like it, but in practice, it's adding an extra hurdle that if the goal is to encourage SB9 developments, and if the goal is to encourage more of this density of housing, it's a kind of nitpicky requirement to have in place for these people to deal with.
Sure, I hear that. I think Claire also made a good point that we can't account for everything.
Fair enough. Yeah.
And it seems like right now the process is the IR for the most part, right?
Right.
Which seem to be going well. And this is really just to help lots that might not even need to go through that, right? This is going to be that in between that'll make it go faster.
Mhm.
So I guess for me, I'm like slightly less inclined to remove all of these because it's true. I mean, it's true. There is a complication that a lot of these won't apply to a lot of lots.
Right.
But I think if we accept that and say, okay, there's going to be however much percentage of lots that just can't go through these streamlined processes, but the alternative is still not a bad process, the IR process.
You're right. That the alternative, as Claire was saying earlier, that there is still a discretionary path forward that's still available. And I think that does need to be made clear sort of on repeat, especially to applicants, because they'll say, oh, well, I don't comply with this. I can't do this. So I think that being clear, but I also, I hear you that we're trying to just sort of keep it the same and yeah,
Keep it as simple as possible. you know?
that's what I'm
Really,
thinking is.
You know, I
streamline
mean,
this.
let's make this process work.
Yeah.
So people don't have to go to the discretionary
Right.
process.
Yeah.
Over a
But some
planting
of them are
strip,
going to
right?
have to regardless.
I know, but like, would you really want to have to go through the discretionary process because of a planting strip?
Right.
Right.
Like, I
I
have
think-
3.5 feet and I don't have 4, right? All of a sudden I have to go through discretionary. That seems a little ridiculous.
Right. I think
Yeah.
it's, I will say I think the goal of this is to strike a balance. I
Yeah.
think generally we've taken a pretty conservative approach in these objective standards in the initial, because we kind of took the position of like, we're gonna, do letter of the law and we don't want a lot of projects moving forward, doing a lot of stuff that we don't want to see. We'd rather push them into a discretionary review and review it through that. But I think that the goal of this process, and moving forward a permanent ordinance, is to really think about it a little bit more now and try and strike a balance between what will streamline projects and allow people to move forward without taking up more, creating unnecessary review times and staff time, but also still meeting the high quality standards that we're seeing through the IR review process.
And I'll just add that a number of cities are in this same process, right?
Yeah.
We're all in the same process where we've done something quickly just to get something that we've already been using to work for this process and see, and the council specifically asked, come back in a year and let's see, how it's gone. We've had a number of projects, not a lot, but a number that we can tell the story and figure out, going forward, is there something else we should be considering? Are the guidelines too strict and this kind of thing, the standards?
Well, that's the reason we're saying what we're saying about this particular detail. We're trying to make it simpler.
Right.
Let the designer figure out the best way to put the path in and the best way to get to the front door. And you don't really need a planting strip for that. Anybody's going to do the obvious detail on something like that. So keep
Right.
it simple. So for example, now you have specific trees picked out for the property line.
Right.
Some of those trees are really like building a wall. I recall one particular project where one of our better architects in town said, let's wall off the neighbor and build all these pine trees and make a wall out of that. It really is almost like building a wall. So in my own lot, I have bamboo. Isn't that allowable in this situation? It isn't particularly solid, but if you separate trees, you're going to have areas between them, regular other trees. So I don't know why it has to be quite so specific. Once again, couldn't it be more general? Couldn't you say
Which-
percentage of
Um,
coverage or something like that?
So I believe our screening landscaping only specifies that it's 1 tree or shrub per 25 feet. And it does require it to be evergreen, but if we have a recommended list, that's not a required list. Like, they are allowed to propose other species.
Even under this process, they can do that now?
So, I mean, I'm not sure what species list you're referring to.
Well,
Yeah, I didn't see where is there a species defined?
screening landscaping,
Which number?
planting type. Well, you do say, where is it here? 15 feet at a quantity. Lot line, existing trees to be retained.
I don't see like a Latin name anywhere.
No Latin names, but there, I
Ah.
believe it was specific as to trees that are going to be on the property line, right?
I didn't see
Every,
specific tree
either it's
types.
evergreens or it's deciduous
It
trees.
does reference
Evergreen versus deciduous,
But
and
that's
that
not
makes some
specific
sense in
to
terms of wanting to make sure that you still maintain that level of privacy throughout the year, so I can understand that, but as long as they're not saying it must be a
Okay.
bloodleaf Japanese
think-
maple or whatever, right?
Uh-huh. Okay,
So-
so that you think that's okay.
Yeah, and again, similar cities, like nearby cities use a lot of planting plans and things like that for privacy issues,
Okay,
and I think that's, you can respect that.
So,
50%.
I don't-
Okay.
okay, I'm gonna throw this out there. I don't want to I don't want to start a fight about evergreen and deciduous. I'm gonna start this out with that, but there is I'm just gonna make a plug for deciduous. The place that I was staying at for the last 2 weeks was designed really beautifully because it's winter over there and all of the leaves all of the plants lost their leaves so that all of this winter sun could come in and penetrate the house and make the house nice and warm, even though it was
Yes.
snowing outside. And so I wonder,
I think I know where you're going with
I
this.
think I
I
do
just
too.
think, architects today, like we're not thinking, I mean, privacy is important,
Yes,
but thermal comfort, energy savings, this house was a completely passive house that I was staying at. And it's because it was designed like this. It was
Yeah.
because it was designed to allow for sunlight to come in and keep this house warm in the winter. And, maybe we need to consider that is what I'm saying, that maybe there's other alternatives to screening that could allow for sunlight. I mean, the whole point of the daylight plane, in theory, there was also another part of me that was like, is the daylight plane considering winter angles as well as,
no, it does not.
it's only summer angles?
It doesn't take summer or winter into account. It just says, in general, we want a certain amount of sunlight to hit the neighboring house.
Hmm.
Now, I don't mean to jump in here while you're still speaking.
No,
My
I
my
mean-
one thing is that I think that the goals of these two items are different. I think one is a privacy goal from the neighbor, and considering how close some of these houses are going to be set to each other, and considering the density that we're trying to tackle here, I would urge maintaining privacy is probably the more important of these situations. In the backyards where there is a little bit more applicability for sun and shading, then yeah, those absolutely should be considered. And a good architect should be thinking about the passive energy efficiency of their house, solar heat gain, thermal issues. But I would argue because of the closeness,
to,
privacy.
Because I'm also bothered, it's a wall. When you get an evergreen tree, it's a wall, really.
Yeah.
Very obstructing. There are other ways to create privacy. My
It's true, but
personal preference is that their windows are glazed in such a way that you can't see through them on the side yard. That's the best way to deal with privacy.
see, and then that's where you and I disagree. So I have a whole back wall fence. It's just oleander. I can't see my neighbors on the other side of that fence, even from my second floor. Like you stand there looking out and I see just green and it's amazing. It's beautiful. It's lush. It blows nicely in the wind. And if,
Up to the height of a fence.
it's like 20 feet tall. It's
fence?
just oleander. It's just the oleander grows in the
Oh, I
back. It's
see.
like a weed,
Okay.
right? It just grows back there. I don't even water it. It just grows. And having that as sort of a fence between myself and my back neighbor, I actually much prefer to staring at because they built an ADU recently, and staring at their roof, I would see. And now I don't see it. I just see plants, which I find much more attractive. So for me personally, and again, this is a preference thing. So we're getting a little off topic here.
Mhm.
I want to make sure we're not sitting there having these conversations for the rest of the
Not too
afternoon.
much longer.
I think we can, it's not just about preference though. I would say it's for me at least, it's about, we're densifying our city, right? And in density, we need to think about sustainability. We need to think about, there's going to be double the energy use here. There's going to be
Quadruple the energy use.
or quadruple the energy use here. And we need to make sure that as part of our standards, we're also considering the sustainable aspects of all of this. And so I would, in general, one of my main comments here is like, I would love for there to be much more considerations for passive building throughout these standards, you know, that maybe green roofs are incentivized, you know, those are great for visual
Yeah, living
reasons.
roofs. Yeah,
As well as, you know, they're great thermal masses.
good for the bees.
Hmm?
Good for the bees.
Great for the bees. Yes. Yeah. I mean, it was amazing. This area that I was staying in, this one passive architect has sort of designed all of these houses, and it's just incredible. It's like, I don't know why our cities aren't thinking about our communities as these cohesive buildings that can survive on their own, that don't need mechanical,
Right.
you know, help, that, you know, are kind of like, we need to really be thinking about these. And I don't think we are. We're thinking about privacy is great. I mean, those are important things, but
I think you just opened a can of worms here,
Yes.
Osman,
I think I
'cause-
did. So let's stop it for the moment.
Well, I'm just going to say, the grand scheme of things is that we are densifying this area by this SB 9 rule. It is out of our hands at this point. It is a state law. We must comply. And the question is, how do we comply in the most responsible way possible? And what's interesting here is that while our focus is on architecture and aesthetics and being good neighbors, we're not talking about the electrical grid. We're not talking about the sanitary sewer systems. We're not talking about the way the water usage, fire considerations. None of that is being discussed. But that is, again, outside of our purview from the ARB.
Is it?
I was
Is it though?
actually-
I don't think it is.
We are tasked with
we
the
have to-
architectural.
We have to move on.
We do
So-
have to move on. We do need to sort of keep going here.
So I wanted to say that 1.5B, because we got to get out of the
Yeah.
ones here.
Yeah. I would just, if I could just make a sort of quick blanket statement, I think that garages, pie-shaped lots, flag-shaped lots needs to be exempted. I think that that's just going to be way too restrictive for those properties. I also think that some considerations need to be made for pie-shaped lots and flag lots for this two-story issue, which I think David is about to get into with 1.5.
B, yeah,
yeah.
it's a very, very conscriptive
Yes.
sort of ruling.
Highly restrictive.
Highly
It's going to be
yep.
real problematic in certain situations.
Mhm.
I think we need to get a lot more focus on daylight plane setbacks,
So much with you on that. you
right?
know.
And that saying that this has to be 500 square feet. Also, like looking at the very first image of your presentation, it looks like a little cute little fourplex, right? That can't be built with any of this. It's flat walls up and down. It's the same front setback. It completely blows through the daylight plane. And yet, is that what they're trying to encourage to be built? Then they're writing rules that can't allow that. So
it's a
This
diagram.
is a
I know it's a
very-
diagram, I know, but it's, you know, it feels like the intent and maybe this is for the best that Palo Alto is trying to encourage sort of almost like mini cul-de-sacs everywhere, where you have one property with a little driveway and 4 little cottages around it. That feels like what all of this is written for. So
Then build a cottage cluster.
yes, these cottage clusters that we do have
They're
in
excellent.
Professorville, and they're
Mhm.
cute and they're lovely. And maybe
Mhm.
that's the goal. And if that's the goal, this is well written for that.
Mhm. Agreed. So can we ask you to take a really detailed look at 1.5B and see if it's possible to create something that's not so constrictive?
Yeah, that 7 feet should be from setback or from property line, from existing setback. I think that by saying from existing house line is unfair to the people that own the house.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of saying, it's basically forcing a step back.
Right.
And so it's saying 7 foot from the existing line of the building so that the step back feels significant.
Right. But is the goal to create a visual break of the building, or is it to provide daylight and airflow to the neighbor?
I think
And if
it's to
it's-
provide a visual break. It's trying to say you're
Why are
stepping
we-
down to your single family neighbor, right?
To-
So
to
it's
make
not
sure
like you're
there's no
doing
visual
a
massing.
2-foot wall.
Yes,
And then
the-
you have 10 feet and then
the-
you have your neighbor.
the daylight plane does that.
Yeah, the intent, I think, is very much the visual break in the wall.
Yeah, it's the visual stepping. So it's saying your step has to be 7 feet.
Sure, but then I would argue that 7 feet seems pretty intense for a visual break. You can do that with 3 feet easily. and still maintain buildability, right? 7 feet, the
Yeah.
note, I mean, that's minimum
Exactly.
dimension for a room, right? That's minimum dimension for a habitable room. You could get a staircase in 7 feet, and yet we're requiring it because we don't like the way it looks, feels kind of restrictive.
We could suggest something smaller, maybe 5 feet or something, 4 feet.
I mean, the way that I would write this is I would just say it has to be minimum 7 feet from the existing setback and no less than 2 feet from the existing wall. Right? Then you've got a 2-foot minimum setback from whatever the wall is. But if you're, so you can't have it straight up and down. So minimum 2 feet setback. That curve,
So
or
it's
3
like
feet,
10
or whatever you
feet,
want.
2 feet, 10 feet.
Right, well, just saying if there's if it is, all the way back and you don't, say it's, so the 7 foot is the minimum from the set side yard setback, right? So.
Well, right now that's what you're suggesting.
Right, and then irregardless, and that's how it's written right now, and then irregardless of where that is, well, actually, you're right, it's not how it's written right now. I'm saying 7 feet from setback should be how it's written. And then irregardless of that 7 foot setback, the bottom and the upper must be a minimum of 2 feet back. Because then that way you can't build straight up and down, no matter where you place this thing. You're always gonna get that visual break.
I don't know if that'll feel like a step
How
down.
about in
Or 3
case
feet.
there is a driveway along to access the
Exactly, then what?
rear yard?
You're still getting
I
a
would
wall,
also-
right?
I would also just insert, just remember it's like a big math problem.
Right.
It could be where they draw the new lot line for the urban lot split
Right,
is going to change the setback and is going to be less than that. So you could
Right.
end up with a,
and then this is-
4-foot setback to the existing wall. So if you're
Actually,
only
it
referring-
wouldn't necessarily apply in that case because
It wouldn't.
because it would only apply if you were building 1 2-story house and 1 1-story house under SB 9. If you were building 2 2-story houses, then 1.5B doesn't apply at all.
but if your neighbor's an existing 1-story house, then both of your properties have to account for that
Yeah.
over there as well. I mean, my concern is that we're gonna say 7 feet back from the lower floor, and then you have to have a minimum 15-foot wide 2-story building. And then all of a sudden, because both your neighbors are single stories, you're encroached in on so much, you can only get a 12-foot wide second story, you're out. That's it, right? It's so restrictive that you're gonna really make it so that people can't do this. Sorry, I'm getting a little
That's-
little
Again,
riled
they
up here.
can't, again, they can do it, but they have to go through discretionary review.
Fair, okay.
7 feet does feel like, I
It's a
don't know,
lot.
I don't know if the intent was 7 feet from the wall
Right.
setback. I agree that does seem like a large.
I'm just
Right.
thinking
That
about
could
the
be
like
a large
height
setback.
to, like, if I'm thinking of stepping down,
Yeah.
right, to something, 2 feet, like if I'm stepping down, if I'm going down 10 feet and then 2 feet and then
Yeah,
10 feet, that
maybe
doesn't really
4
feel like a
feet.
step. I think
Right.
4 feet might feel
3
better,
feet,
4 or
whatever.
5.
I have about 3 feet in my house and it works perfectly for the daylight plane
Right.
above for the second story.
Right.
Do you have a single family adjacent to your house?
Do I have a single family? Yeah.
Like a single
Adjacent,
story,
yeah.
sorry, a
No,
single story,
It used to be a single story.
Yeah.
but no
When I
longer.
started building the house, but then they built a 2-story house. In fact, they
And then it
probably-
wouldn't have applied, right? Then you could have just gone, no step
No,
back at
no,
all.
I had the daylight plane. I followed the daylight
Oh,
plane.
well, yeah, outside of the daylight plane, if you were in
Right.
it.
Mhm.
So,
Exactly.
Maybe
In
4
fact, the
feet's not
contractor
compromise.
said-
right, I mean, that's the thing is that it's, a lot of this is compromise and to sort of step back a second, I feel like there's a lot of information here and we could nitpick this to death, right? We could go over item by item and be here for the next 6 hours. And in an attempt to make sure that we don't do that, I guess the question is,
Well,
do we
let's
need to
stick
circle
with
back to this? Is there?
Yeah, I mean-
Major items in each chapter here
Right.
and make a decision on
Yeah.
that. We already agreed 1.5B is a significant one.
Yep,
I think we should say, review the daylight plane as a possibility instead of using specific numbers, because you yourselves are saying 7 feet might
Yeah.
be too much.
Yeah.
So let's leave it at that. And it's
Yeah.
really up to us together, let's say, to make this better.
Yeah, there's also a good point that you're going to design for somebody next door who's a single family that may end up adding a story
Thank
and then
you.
you didn't have to do that to begin with. So
yeah. And that seems to be a trend in Palo Alto that we're constantly, while it's trying to be neighborly, and I appreciate that, you're requiring people to build for something that might not be there in 2 years.
Mhm.
Right? And that's really unfortunate to place these sort of harsh restrictions on people who want to further improve their homes because their neighbor doesn't want to. So,
Okay, I've come around. Let's just stick to the daylight plane.
yep,
Call it a day.
I'm with you. All right,
So,
David, what do you have next? I don't
so-
have anything until,
So,
So
Sorry, go ahead.
sticking more to the daylight plane and considering maybe not having these additional setback standards.
correct.
Okay.
And then,
Yeah, and
the
I think it is a good point. Maybe we should circle back again. I don't know if we can, if there's a chance for us to review this next time.
Yeah, I think there's more opportunities. Maybe in the interest of time for
Yeah.
this study session, I'll leave this to Chair Hirsch, but maybe we could consider just kind of highlighting in each category, like the key issues, even if we don't have solutions at this
Right.
point. That way staff can maybe think about those key issues and come back with some suggestions that we can discuss further.
I'm just wondering if it makes sense for us to simply go home and write up our comments. and-
yeah, I feel like I could have a list and submit it to the other ARB board members, see where we get an agreement. I don't know if that's how we are allowed to do that because.
We would prefer that you through the
Through
staff liaison,
Yeah,
share that way because
Of
we're not
course.
going to have something
we
outside.
don't want a
that.
Brown Act
I mean,
issue,
I
right.
feel like it would be great to be, isolating to, each one of you has, 7 or, key.
Right.
Come back with those 7, see, that might turn into 40, but come back with those initially.
Yeah.
And have staff,
Okay.
come up with some alternatives
Yeah,
based on the comments we do receive.
I think that might behoove us at this point because again, just looking, we're not even through the second set of
Right.
comments here and there's a
I could
whole.
see us just going on and on.
Exactly. So
So I would ask every
Yeah.
board member to take a magnifier to everything here.
I agree.
Sorry to tell you that, but I think it's necessary. And just say which ones they think are critical.
Yep,
I'm not going to say a number because you might have 11
I
and
know.
I might
yeah.
have 50.
Let's try to get it
Not really.
under 10. as
Yeah,
best we can.
try and keep it 10 each, people.
And then,
So to the extent that we can, we could continue the study session. If
Yes.
there are
Yeah.
areas where there's going to be a ordinance change, then we would have to do some notification.
Sure.
But study sessions can be, at a whim, put on the agenda within 7 days because we're not affecting an actual address
Right.
specifically.
And maybe
Okay.
for our next meeting, we can streamline, we can go straight to discussion because we
Yes.
received the staff presentation.
Yes,
Yeah,
That might allow us to spend
yeah,
more
good, good
time
comment.
just
yeah.
talking. Because it's really great, I think, for us to hear our points and
right.
change our minds.
You know, I see that you're receptive to some of this. That's exciting, to know that, that, I know you guys have been working on it hard and
Right.
translating sort of the history of Palo Alto into words here that we're trying to work on. And to a great extent, you have to say that a lot of the things in Palo Alto are really great the way they are built. I feel that way when I walk around and see neighborhoods or bike around. Anyhow, let's do it that way. And I think that we could sum it up on this piece.
Should we get Peter back for our next
Yeah, do we
item?
need to do a motion
Is
or
he in
anything?
the-
We continue this? It's just, we'll
I
review for
think
next
so.
time.
Study sessions, we don't do.
Homework for
them.
don't
everybody.
know if we really need it.
I think you don't have to, it's just nice to express that to the public who may be
Yeah.
interested that we are, intending to have another study session
Yep.
to
Yeah.
continue on this path of, looking at the thing we looked at back in December 2021.
Right.
Mhm.
Thank
To
you.
make some additional changes based on what we've seen in the field with applications.
Okay, so it gives us a real chance as architects to make a comment on this, and let's leave it like that.
All right, sounds good. So we'll move on.
Yeah.
Should I don't know if Peter's back there. Should I go
Yeah,
check if he
we
is?
should get him back.
Should we
just
take
do
like a-
approvals.
A 5-minute break?
Sure, let's do that too. Okay, let's get back. So we're on on revised architectural review board bylaws to address remote virtual meeting attendance in 2023. What's the matter? I'm not close enough? Okay. So
Yeah,
what-
say it again.
Say it again.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Review revised architectural review board bylaws to address remote virtual meeting attendance in 2023.
And for the record, Board Member Balte has joined us again.
Thank you. Yes. So staff doesn't have a presentation for this, but I'll just quickly summarize that in the last session we had, the feedback that staff received was that there wasn't really an interest in following the standard noticing procedures separate from what's provided under AB 2449, which allows for remote attendance through just cause and emergency circumstances. So what's presented to you today is a change to the bylaws that's much simplified in comparison to what was reviewed last time, that simply references back to the allowances under AB 2449 for just cause and emergency circumstances attending remotely. We did feel it was important, just for everybody's clarification, we did put in the bylaws what that 20% would be, which is 4 total hearings. And what we've done is created just an internal protocol for remote ARB hearing attendance. This is a little bit more for staff, really, just to have some sort of internal document to help us make sure that we're, meeting all of the requirements as we, for anybody who chooses to attend remotely under those allowances.
All right, does anybody have comments on any of this?
Can I ask a question first, please?
Go ahead.
Of staff. I just want to confirm that the sum total of the changes are now Article 6, Section 6.3, which has been added.
Correct.
No other changes in that in the.
No other changes.
Thank you.
I was just going to ask if there's any comments from the public on this.
No public comment.
Reminder. Should
Yeah.
we take a vote on this?
I move that we,
Could you hold for a second, Osma? I want
yeah,
to bring something up on this. The reason I came back on this whole thing, it's a very simple seeming item. But if I remember right, Board Member Thompson, you weren't here when we first discussed this last week. And one of my concerns has been that this doesn't really have any change to how we function. If you look at these requirements in this protocol, for practicing architects, it just doesn't make any difference to how we function. Basically, we're not allowed to have any remote attendance. We had been angling through the COVID pandemic, especially you, Osma, that we ought to have some way to do this. And what staff has been telling us is that it's just not allowed. There's no way we can create remote attendance without having one of these excuses. Either you're sick, you're on city leave, or you're giving so much notice and you're assuming ADA responsibility for the hotel room you're sitting in at work or your office, which is just not realistic. Do we want to, as a board, push to do something that works for us so that board members who are practicing professionals and have to be at a work meeting the same time they have a board meeting are still able to remotely attend on rare occasions? Because some members of the board have expressed serious requests to do that. It would be in conflict or in discussion with the staff, but that's why I think I'm bringing this up, and especially for you, Osma. I mean, this is something I think you feel strong about.
yeah, that's a good point. That's true. I wasn't here last week when this was discussed. And And maybe I was kind of under the illusion that that was included in here because we have a specific internal protocol for remote hearing for ARB attendance. I don't know why we would have something specific if it was the same as everything else. So for my benefit, having a just cause being a work-related item is not on here. And why was that?
So these allowances come directly from state code. So while we fully understand the board's interest in allowing for remote attendance for these other circumstances, it's not allowed under AB 2449. So what we had looked at last time when you were absent, there is a protocol that can be followed that talks about standard remote attendance procedures. But it's very onerous. And what was expressed to staff was that there really wasn't an interest in using that. Now, the way that we've written it in this code, if you choose to do that, you still can. But there are a number of procedures we have to follow, which include advance noticing to the public. It includes making the space that you are located in available to members of the public. As Board Member Balte noted, assuring that it's ADA compliant. So you certainly, even though we've kind of taken out all that extra language, if you ever choose to do that, we can certainly work with you and ensure compliance, because those allowances have always been allowed under the Brown Act and would continue to be allowed. But just to simplify things, since there didn't seem to be much interest in following all of those procedures, we didn't include all that extra language as part of the bylaws. So
got it. Yeah, actually, I think my position on this has evolved a little bit. Having come here in person the few times, that we've begun to do this in person again, there is a tremendous benefit in being here in person. And, we have planned absences for a reason, I think. And so I'm actually okay with things the way they are written as they are. Because there's, especially, if you're sick or can't attend for whatever reason, it's better for us to be here in person. We're a better board when we're here in person.
Great. That's good to hear. Why don't you go ahead with your motion then? Thank you.
I really appreciate you, though.
He's just thinking about you.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate that. Thank you. Okay, so I'll move that we approve this revised element to our bylaws.
I'll second that motion.
Could we take a vote?
Vice Chair Balte,
Yes.
Board Member Chen,
Yes.
Chair Hirsch,
Yes.
Board Member Rosenberg,
Yes.
Board Member Thompson,
Yes.
motion carries 5-0.
So then, let's see, the 414 California Avenue, that's the next one here?
No, it's the minutes.
it's the minutes.
Oh, the minutes, okay, sorry. Minutes of, for February 16th, 2023.
We have one excited board member. I'll abstain from voting on this because I was absent.
And I have no comments or adjustments.
Are there any other comments?
I move that we approve these minutes as presented.
I'll second.
All those in favor, take a vote.
Aye.
Hold on.
You're doing a roll call vote or just a verbal vote? It's his choice.
Front.
Vice Chair Balte,
Yes.
Board Member Chen,
Yes.
Chair Hirsch,
Yes.
Board Member Rosenberg,
Yes.
Board Member Thompson.
Abstain.
Abstains.
Motion carries 401.
So was that seconded by Hirsch?
Yes.
No, seconded by Chen.
Oh, it was?
Move to approve by Chen, I thought.
Okay.
I heard Chen. Sorry. Maybe your
One way or
microphone
another,
was off.
we all
Sorry.
I believe Board Member Chen moved to approve and it was seconded by Hirsch. Is that?
Okay.
No, wait, is that right? I thought Board Member
Yeah, Board
Balte.
Vice Chair,
Vice Chair Balte moved to
Oh,
approve
I'm
and I
sorry.
second.
and Chen seconded.
So,
Thank you.
so let's see, what's this one?
So I think we can, so just to clarify, the 414 ad hoc that was intended to follow this meeting.
Oh, it's dismissed.
Yeah,
Is
it's
just,
dismissed
yeah,
for now.
not,
Okay,
not
fine.
moving forward. So
So then we're done.
unless there's any board member questions, comments, or announcements.
Yes, I have an announcement. I'll be out of town in July from the 13th to the 26th.
Thank you. So the July 15th meeting, Thompson also has a planned absence,
No,
so
that's-
please,
That's June 15th.
oh, I'm sorry, thank you.
It's July 20th.
July 20th. So Rosenberg also has a planned absence that day. So if anybody else plans to be absent for the July 20th hearing, please do let me know because we won't have a.
I think Rosenberg's planned for the 6th, not the 20th.
Oh,
So we're okay. And is
And-
Chair Balte going, or Vice Chair Balte going to take over as chair? Board Member Hirsch?
Yes,
Or
please,
Chair Hirsch?
Vice, can you fill in for that one?
That's going to be a vote next meeting, right?
Oh, you're right.
yeah,
We're going to have a new
yeah.
chair next meeting.
Yeah, wherever you are, can you take over?
We will have a vote.
Well, we
next
know we'll have
meeting.
other, okay.
Is
so
it
we'll deal with
okay that we're doing this? Well, because Board Member Chen's not going to be here.
Maybe it's better if she's here for the vote.
Yes, it would be. Can we defer that for one meeting?
I think so. I believe we could choose to.
Might be a good idea.
Yeah,
Be good to have the full board here to make that decision.
sure.
Thank you for including
Yeah, I think
me.
if that's a choice of the board, I think we can do it.
Okay, so we'll push the elections to the April 20th meeting.
Isn't that something we can decide at the meeting if we decide to postpone it?
Yes.
So I recommend we just wait till the meeting. If it seems like we don't have a full quorum, 100%, we should postpone it. I agree.
What's the difference between deciding now and deciding later?
I'm okay with either.
I suppose there's no difference. Just thinking what's proper somehow.
Yeah. I mean, we know that we have this on the docket for next week, but if we know that we're
Fair
gonna
enough,
not
yeah.
have a full board next week, then
Yeah, we have done that in the past to push off these elections. That seems appropriate. So yes.
so we'll push it out.
Okay, so and with that, we can adjourn.
Thank you.